and welcome back to a channel that I've definitely been posting on very consistently, and nobody noticed that I wasn't, and that's okay. I've been here the whole time. Happy Valentine's Day. That said, we're going to talk about romance writing a little bit this week. If you're interested in more romance writing, writing advice, things that I actually do post consistently on, check me out here on TikTok at Scarlett_Ansley. This is me. I am there every day. So, I promise I exist outside of the couple months break that I take from being here. But we're going to forget about that and go into what we're talking about today. So we're going to do 5 things you should be doing in your romance writing and 5 things maybe you just shouldn't. That would be nice. These are just general points that I think will help your writing and will help you create more engaging romance throughout your story. And that's not just in romance-specific books, but also in any kind of book that has a romantic subplot. So, if you're in here for that, then stick around and let's see the first 5. What should you be doing in your romance writing? Number 1 is let the relationship breathe. What does that mean? Well, I'm sorry, Insta-love people, we're not going to be doing that today. It's one of those things where you have to let your characters get to know each other or develop those feelings as we go. Sometimes I feel like we see these characters and we're like, I need them to be in love right now. And that is too soon. Relationships develop slowly and organically, and even if they are existing relationships, they change over time because things change, situations change, and we have to make sure we're factoring all of that into what we're talking about. So let your relationships breathe. Don't force them. Don't make them happen too fast. Just let them interact and progress with the story, and it'll be much stronger. Number 2, similar, plays into number 1, is put pitfalls in front of your characters. And this is true in any kind of a story, not just a romance, but we're talking specifically for romance today. So we're going to put pitfalls in front of your potential couple or whatever kind of relationship you're writing. And it has to involve the story. You don't want things to have 2 separate lines, right? So if you have a story about characters going on an adventure and the 2 characters are falling in love, you want to make sure the pitfalls also have something to do with their adventure. Maybe somebody gets kidnapped by a dragon. Oh no, they can't spend time together now. How will they ever fall in love? How will their love progress when one of them is in a dragon's nest horde? I don't know, dragon stuff. But you get my point. Make sure that it all plays into the story and you're letting the situation that they are in help develop their relationship. Otherwise, it sort of feels stilted and like you're doing 2 different stories. And it doesn't have to be every single plot point. So you're allowed to give them quiet moments, maybe by the fire, if you're going with this dragon story and they're on an adventure. And let them talk and let them develop and have maybe conversations while they're walking down the road or whatever. But you want the bigger pitfalls, the big problems, and all of those sorts of things to engage with what's going on in the story. Number 3, give your characters unique voices and playful banter. Your characters in general in your story should have unique voices. So whether that be some kind of notable phrase that they say a lot, or I don't know, like an accent, but you don't go too heavy-handed on that, but different kind of ways they think and speak, and so when you're reading as a reader and not the writer, you know who's talking. This is particularly useful in these sorts of situations when you're going back and forth between 2 characters and you don't want to keep bogging it all down with dialogue tags or action tags. You don't need so-and-so said after every single line if we already know who's writing. Speaking. We know you're writing if we know who's speaking. If we know who is speaking in the scene. And that's, the point of dialogue tags in the first place is so that we know as readers who is talking. So if we already know who's talking, you don't need them. And the banter comes in and your unique voices come in very clearly if you've defined who your characters are and how they are with each other at that point in the story. Because those relationships will progress over time, and so obviously the way they talk to each other might change, but your characters should still have authenticity to who they are as they're going back and forth. Plus, banter is just really fun to read. So work on your character voices, work on how they interact together. That'll be really strong for your story. Number 4, opposites attract sometimes. So obviously this is a known cliche, and that's a problem in itself, but I'm going to get there in the second half of this video. I've said this on my TikTok all the time. I do enjoy an enemies to lovers story. I hate you and everything you stand for. Yes, I also hate you, and there's no way we could ever find middle ground. I could never, ever, ever love you. Ever. Except then they do. But it doesn't have to be that. You know, they can be on the same side of something but disagree about certain fundamental things, or not quite see eye to eye on actions that should be taken or how they should get from point A to point B. And these are good opportunities for your characters to show who they are as people as they interact together. And as the story progresses, either they come to see the other person's side and they, agree with them, or they can at least see where they're coming from and stay where they are on their opinions about how things should go, but they can respect the other character's way of viewing the world. And this gives you a lot of opportunity as a writer to be able to extrapolate upon the way that characters are and how they think and how they feel and how they interact together. And it gives you a lot of room for their relationship to grow and expand over time as they're coming to understand each other. And I said sometimes because there are some things that just really should not be attracting to each other. And this isn't necessarily true. I know that people make this work, but I find like significant opinions about things that are not likely to be shaken make it very hard to have a strong relationship. So if you have characters with incredibly, incredibly opposing like political views or religious views, unless that's part of your story where they're coming to understand each other, if it just is what it is and it stays like that, it's very hard in real life and in stories to overcome those barriers. And you can put them aside and ignore them, but that's still a lot of who a character is deep down, so they will always have those issues with each other. So unless you are going to use that as something that they can grow and learn and extrapolate on later down the road, those sorts of things can make it really hard to have a strong relationship. Not impossible. I know people in real life who make it work, but just something to think about. Number 5, you can use some cheesy tropes. And I'm not saying go overboard on it or go ham, but like I love a good like, oh no, there's one bed. And it doesn't have to be like steamy or anything, but just like putting them into situations where they're a little bit out of their comfort zone and they're like forced together a little bit. It's so good. And obviously we don't want to do, like I said, we don't want to overdo it. But a little bit here and there. I know that they're cheesy and sometimes people think that they're overdone, but if you do it like just a little bit, just tastefully enough, sprinkle it into a much larger manuscript, who's gonna care? Me? No, absolutely not. Do it. You should do it. If you're thinking about it, just And that's not all tropes. There are some that are definitely like too overdone. I mean, this one's not a romance trope, but like waking up in the morning all the time as that like the beginning of your story, beginning of your chapters, that's too overdone. So those sorts of things that are really noticeable, maybe don't do. But there are some just little things here and there. We've made it to the second half of this video, the less exciting, more heart-to-heart kind of a moment. Writers, if you're watching this, if you're writing a romance story, please do not do these 5 things. Don't let whatever the bad thing your love interest does be too bad to overcome later down the road. So a lot of stories I've seen in books and fan fiction and other things start with or involve a potential love interest doing something especially heinous. And I say a lot. I don't mean a lot, but enough that it's noticeable. Like, you don't want them to be like an abusive partner. That's not cute. I have a TikTok about this too. There's a line, right? There's a line and you do not cross it because I cannot root for someone who's that awful to their partner. That's not romance. That's like romanticized bullshit that happens in real life, and that's not cute. It's not good. We should not be romanticizing bad things like that because then people think it's okay in their real lives. So we have to stop, draw the line there, because that's not romance. Unless your story is like a Marriage Story, the movie. And it talks about and looks at how that relationship was not healthy for either party and how sometimes it's better to let go. You don't involve this sort of like abusive dynamic between your characters because that is toxic. And we don't want to propagate any sort of toxic romance that could also be brought into the real world. I think that we've got enough of those sorts of stories, enough of the 50 Shades of Grey and 365 Days and all of those sorts of stories where you know that that just is not healthy, and I don't know why we keep saying that that's cute, because it's not. So we don't want our characters to do anything to each other that's so bad that we cannot recover. I kind of looped 1 and 2 in together, but number 2 is that tension and challenge in a relationship does not mean abuse. There's going to be challenges, right, between your characters. That's how they have an interesting, more dynamic relationship, but it doesn't have to be awful. It doesn't have to be this negative. You can build tension in other ways without it being really detrimental to your character. You know, like you can build romantic tension, you can build sexual tension, you can build like confused tension, like what are we kind of tension, and none of that has to come from something so awful. And I know that I know these 2 points can sound very similar, but I feel like it's just really worth hammering home because I don't like seeing this in media, and it's all over media. So just like find healthier ways to give your characters challenges and to make them confused and intrigued about each other, and it doesn't have to be like psychologically or physically abusive, right? We good? Okay. I think. Okay. Yes. It's time for Insta Love. I mentioned it slightly before, but do not make your character say "I love you" too soon. I love you. I know we just met all but 10 minutes ago, but I've never loved anyone more in my entire life. I love you too. You are the stars. You are the sky. You are the night. Insta lust is much more common than insta love in reality. Like you get people in real life at clubs at anywhere who like will hook up with each other much faster than 2 random people in a room would say I love you. And that's because that's just not how relationships work. I know some people maybe would, but that's not what we're talking about. We want to make sure that, like I said, in the good side of relationship writing, your character and your character relationships overall have time to breathe and have time to grow naturally over time within the context of the story and the challenges that are being posed to them and put in front of them, both within the actions of what they're doing outside of the relationship and within their pairing together. If that makes sense. Because if you put 2 characters together and they say I love you way too soon, unless that's the point of the story is them learning what love really is or something like that, it just doesn't feel natural, and also it doesn't have the same kind of tension, like when you read a slow burn romantic story and you're waiting and waiting and waiting and you're like, I just want these characters to fall in love. That's the tension that the writer is giving the reader, as opposed to tension within the story between characters. So we want that tension between the writer and the reader to build as the character's romantic tension builds also. And so if we say I love you too soon, 1, it just doesn't feel right. It doesn't seem organic or natural. And 2, you're sort of ruining the joy that comes with like those characters finally falling in love and saying it to each other as you go. Number 4 is avoiding the cliches. And I know that this is, again, very popular advice for any kind of writing, but there are so many different cliches for romance. It's kind of wild. And so you can have a character who speaks with cliches, because people do that in real life. But if you're writing, maybe just try to find something more interesting. Like, unless you're doing a twist on it. So if a character says, like, oh, there's plenty of fish in the sea, Carl. I mean, you could say that. It's not crazy bad, but it would be fun and add to the banter if you have the 2 characters and the one's like, there's plenty of fish in the sea, Carl. And then Carl goes, man, I'm afraid of open water. Like you have this sort of twist on the cliche that makes it sound more interesting or adds a new layer to it. I don't know. I mean, that one might all like be used also, but you get my point. There's lots of ways to say things that are more interesting in stories, and the whole love at first sight, she had me at hello, all of that kind of stuff that's been done to death. Find your own words for it, because 1, cliches like that will pull readers out of the story, because it reminds them of all the other times they've heard it, and they think either of a different story, or they stop reading your story to think, I've heard that a lot of times. So if you can find a different way to play those words out in your own words or in your own character's words, that'll just keep engagement higher within your book, and also just make you sound more interesting. You are a very capable person. You can say these words with your own mind, your own heart. You don't need all these other people's words to say what you're going to say. So find it in yourself, write it down, avoid cliches unless you can make it fun. And number 5, love does not conquer all. And I'm not saying that just because it's cliche. It is not true. I think that we get into these mindsets of, well, okay, the characters have fallen in love, so now everything is solved. And that's not true. If you have a character who's got a lot going on behind the scenes, and I don't know, if you're trying to go for a more inclusive story and your character has like any kind of mental illness or any kind of other trauma going on in the background, becoming a person who is in love with another person does not solve the trauma. It does not make, depression go away. It doesn't stop you from being anxious or having any kind of issue, not issue, but or having anything that you have, right? Your experiences still exist while you're in love with somebody. So to say love conquers all, I know it's probably not what it was initially intended to mean, but the way it sounds now is, oh, I'm in love and now I have no more problems. And that's just simply not true. So, when you're writing, if your characters have fallen in love, you've done all the things well, and you've gotten to this point and they're together, that's wonderful. But make sure that you're acknowledging that not everything is just solved all of a sudden. Your characters still have things that they need to work through, or things that will just always be there, depending on what your character's got going on. And you just have to acknowledge that. And whether that's, whether they're in love and it's the end of the book, or it's somewhere in the middle, or you're at the climax, which is usually when that sort of thing happens, and they still have to defeat the big bad, or whatever kind of story you're writing, there's still stuff that needs to be dealt with. If somebody's died, they still have to deal with grief. Just make sure that even though they're in love, it doesn't take away, one, their autonomy. They're still the same person, they're just in love now. And two, does not get rid of everything else that's going on in the background of that character, because it's not really in the background if you think about it. It's just part of who they are. If anything, the love is in the background because that's a separate entity from you, even though sometimes maybe it doesn't feel that way. But those were 10 things, 5 and 5, that you should and should not do when writing romance. Got lots more to say. If you're interested, let me know. If you have other writing related things that you're wondering about, you can find me on TikTok here. I do post there every day. So I'll be there, I'll be here. Thanks for sticking with me, and until next time, sweet dreams.